Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. Next week, Patrick Stewart returns to the role of Jean-Luc Picard for the first time since 2002 in the new CBS All Access series Star Trek Picard. I am a huge Next Generation fan. I've said this before, but when I first got into Star Trek, it was from seeing the ads for the 2009 J.J. Abrams movie, and because that was before streaming, or at least before I had streaming, I had to rely on reruns that I could watch on TV, and the Trek I found in reruns was The Next Generation on BBC America. So despite there being a few franchises that I can consider to be my gateway, in a roundabout sort of way, The Next Generation is the reason I'm sitting here doing this video. Because if it hadn't been for me getting into Star Trek, finding SF Debris' review of Generations, and if it wasn't for SF Debris, I'd have never seen the recommended to top the fourth wall video, and if it wasn't for that, I'd have never discovered the site that Linkara used to be a part of and found the community of internet reviewers that inspired me to start making videos in the first place. For want of a sci-fi series, the Literary Lair was lost. So if you really hate my videos, you can technically blame Captain Picard for them. Anyway, I've always been a Next Gen fan, and so purely by name only, Star Trek Picard had me from the moment it was announced. But once we got the cast list, the San Diego Comic-Con trailer that revealed that 7 of 9 and Data were going to show up, and then the New York Comic-Con trailer that showed Picard meeting with Riker and Troy, I was pretty much like,
Yeah, you.
And what better way to commemorate that achievement than with the autobiography of one of Starfleet's most beloved captains. The Autobiography of series is a collection of Star Trek books written primarily by David A. Goodman, who was a writer and consulting producer for Star Trek Enterprise. But before you hold that against him, he also wrote the Futurama episode Where No Fan Has Gone Before, which is held close to the hearts of both Futurama fans and Trekkies alike. He's also the executive producer on Family Guy, but that's beside the point. Goodman previously wrote the autobiography of James T. Kirk, and is set to release the autobiography of Mr. Spock this September, with Una McCormack set to release one of Janeway in July. I personally really like the Kirk book, but opinions are split, because it's Star Trek. The only thing Star Trek fans can ever agree on is that it's pronounced Data, not Data. Will Goodman be able to match the same quality of the Kirk book with Jean-Luc Picard? Let's find out. But first, Iota. Earl Grey tea. Hot. Engage. The cover is okay. It's nothing groundbreaking, but that's because it's written like an in-universe reference guide, so it has to look sleek and unassuming, because it's in character. It's got the command red color on the dust jacket, but the book itself is actually blue, which I choose to see as a reference of Picard's roots as an archaeologist, which would be Sciences Division. What I love is the image of the Enterprise D, where the TNG-era Starfleet comm badge logo looks like it's part of that ring on the top of the saucer section. There's just something so satisfying about that. Other than that, it's fairly bare, apart from the large image of Patrick Stewart on the back, and an in-universe blurb and author summary in the middle in the dust jacket. In terms of immersion and adhering to the conceit that the book is written in-universe, it's rather well done. Let's see what's in there. Our story begins after an introduction from Captain Beverly Crusher Picard that's interrupted by Q to talk about how much he loves Jean-Luc, with a prologue detailing the moments leading up to Picard's assimilation by the Borg in The Best of Both Worlds Part 1. Following that, we jump back to the beginning and into Picard's childhood in Le Bar, France, with a harrowing experience where he disobeyed his father and entered a locked basement, only to discover that the dark family secret was portraits. And they don't even move like Harry Potter portraits either. They're just paintings. Paintings of the Picard family, who had a major part in several aspects of history, but once the 1800s rolled around, the Picards went into the wine business, which actually was a good thing because it helped the family survive during World War III, which makes sense since booze is a popular way of dealing with the world going to hell, leading to the modern era where Picard's father ran the family vineyards. Jean-Luc, however, had different ambitions. Spurred on by the ancestor Louise Picard, who had been the first Mars colonist in the family, Jean-Luc's path is to be the first Picard to leave the solar system. While his mother Yvette is supportive of his endeavors, his father Maurice and brother Robert are less so, with Jean-Luc referring to them as bullies, despite recognizing that Robert did love him as a brother and aimed to protect him. Jean-Luc works hard and gets a chance to take the Starfleet Academy entrance exam, where he first meets Marta from Tapestry, and future Captain Robert De Soto from Tin Man, who would end up commanding the USS Hood, whose first officer was a young Will Riker. Though if you've seen The Next Generation, you know that his first attempt didn't go well, with Jean-Luc explaining that he was put into a tactical situation, much like the Kobayashi Maru, where he was in command of a bridge, but his bridge officers had no idea what the hell they were doing, and Jean-Luc, frustrated with the incompetence, took over all the stations and berated the bridge officers when the simulation ended. De Soto is the only one of the group who gets in, and after returning home defeated to France, Jean-Luc tells his mother, who explains to him that it wasn't a tactical simulation, it was a psych test, showing what Jean-Luc would do in a situation where he loses control, and he cracked under the pressure. I guess Gordon Ramsay would make a really crappy Starfleet captain, huh? Next year he tries again, and with the same 3 bridge officers in the simulation, he realizes that there's a trick to it, and he questions them as to whether they've been trained, and recognizing that he's the least experienced, asks one of them to take command instead, which gets him a passing grade. Jean-Luc leaves home behind and enters the academy, learning that while he was a big fish in a small pond back in France, Starfleet Academy is the best of the best, and he's no different than anyone else. In fact, he's actually a little bit behind. After meeting his roommate Corey Zweller, Picard learns that he was supposed to register before arriving, and thus is forced to take a xenoarchaeology class that he has no interest in just to fill the credit requirement. I know that feeling. Arriving on the first day, he finds that the class only has 2 students in it, including himself. Holy shit, I really do know that feeling. I took a Bronze Age archaeology class back in college that had a total of 3 students in it. It's in that class that Picard not only gains his appreciation for archaeology, but it's where he meets the man that gave it to him, Richard Galen. He also runs into Marta again, since she's also friends with Corey. Picard, wanting to leave his mark, applies to run in the Academy Marathon and throws himself into the training, ignoring socializing. After being ferried to the marathon aboard the Enterprise C, Picard wins the marathon, setting a record and being joined by Marta and Corey, who had volunteered to serve drinks and hors d'oeuvres, just so they could get a free ticket to see Picard win, teaching Picard a valuable lesson about friendship. Picard takes an Intro to Federation Law class, meeting and dating fellow student Philippa Louvois, but their relationship falls apart when Picard chooses to take on an elite piloting course with Marta and Corey. Additionally, Galen offers Picard a chance to go on a dig that might uncover Iconian artifacts. The elite piloting course is where Picard is first introduced to the Nausicaans, and introduces a reckless confidence that sets him farther forward onto the path to becoming a captain. The book also explains that the initials that Picard wrote into the tree that introduced him to the groundskeeper Boothby didn't refer to a specific name, but rather AF stood for attractive female, and was an unnamed woman that he was involved with during that time. Boothby forces him to assist in weeding and planting to repay for damaging the tree, and Picard goes to Boothby for advice when Professor Galen tells Picard that if he wants to go on the dig, he'll have to drop out of the academy, and after thinking it over, Picard decides to turn down the dig offer. After graduating, Ensign Picard is assigned to the USS New Orleans as the flight controller under Captain Hansen, but those plans are deferred after the incident depicted in Tapestry, where Picard is stabbed during a barroom brawl with the Nausicaans and gains an artificial heart. Because the USS New Orleans didn't wait around for him, Picard scrambles to find any open position and gets one on the USS Reliant under Gregory Quinn as a science officer, and while it seems like that should set him back like in Tapestry, Quinn ends up giving him a chance to lead an away team due to his previous archaeological experience, and while checking out the dig site, extremists kidnap the Federation ambassador stationed on that world, and make it so that Picard and his team can't beam back up to the Reliant. Quinn orders Picard to stay low, but Picard uses the opportunity, since the extremists don't know about the survey team, to rescue the ambassador. In the debriefing, Quinn commends Picard for his ingenuity and tells him that he's wasted as a science officer. While the Reliant doesn't have any open flight controller positions, Quinn promotes Picard to lieutenant before agreeing to transfer him to the USS Stargazer. While awaiting the Stargazer at Starbase 74, Picard and a few other junior officers are conscripted by a curmudgeonly old country doctor who is putting together an honor guard for his Vulcan friend's wedding. This book takes the position that Spock married a human woman, though Picard never learns her name or sees her, and the ceremony was officiated by President Uhura. It's also where Picard encounters Sarek for the first time. On the Stargazer, we get the explanation for why Picard dislikes children. As the first officer of the Stargazer, Commander Mazzara had his two sons on board, who were true terrors that make the mild annoyances of Wesley Crusher seem like he was a perfect angel. One of them takes Picard's seat, and because, first officer's sons, he can't smack the kid, so he has to trick the kid into getting up before the captain arrives. 4 years in, the newly appointed Lieutenant Commander Picard learns that the Stargazer doesn't get the most glamorous missions because it's an older ship, and so the captain, Lawton, spends a lot of his time collecting antiques and valuables because what the hell else is he going to do out there? Picard's not thrilled, but Lawton refuses every transfer Picard puts in. One particular item is a new desk he bought from the guy on the North Star colony from Enterprise. One of Goodman's episodes, naturally, and you'll never guess what material the desk is made out of.
It's oak. Nope, it's oak.
Picard has difficulties transporting it aboard because, Lawton wants to keep his antiquing out of the official transporter logs, and he demands that his stuff come up by a shuttle. However, the desk doesn't fit in the shuttle, so Picard straps it to the roof, but it falls off, and the Stargazer just got a distress call, so they gotta hightail it away. Picard beams it up anyway, consequences be damned, and they go out to handle the call. In the ensuing rescue, the ship is damaged and Lawton killed when a panel explodes. Mazzara calls to abandon ship, more interested in ensuring the safety of his sons than the safety of the ship and the crew, and he's the first one to leave the bridge, but Picard countermands him and pulls the ship through. That event has two distinct results. One, Picard becomes the new first officer when Mazzara takes command, and the crew, including Picard, lose all respect for Mazzara. In the aftermath, Picard is sent to handle affairs with Lawton's ex-wife, who turns out to be Guinan, who recognizes Picard, but her Picard is an old bald dude, so maybe her Picard's a distant cousin or something. They fend off a bounty hunter together, and she agrees to take all of Lawton's stuff off their hands. Guinan tells Picard about Lawton's early career and how he was a great captain before he got lazy, and it inspires him to request a transfer from Mazzara, but instead, Mazzara's the one who has transfer news. Because of the lapsing judgment, he's resigning his commission. The Stargazer is Picard's. One of his first acts is to bring in an old Reliance chum as his number one, Walker Keel, and he's introduced to his new con officer, Jack Crusher. They face off against the Planet Killer from the original series, and Jack Crusher proves himself to Picard, setting up their friendship. Over Picard's tenure, he has his first contact with the Cardassians, the Zenkethi, rescuing Galen from them during Galen's search for the Iconians, and Jack is introduced to a cute redhead named Beverly Howard. Picard's mother comes down with Irumodic syndrome, and Picard intends to ask for a leave of absence, but Admiral Hansen instead requests for him to become his chief of staff at Starfleet Command while the Stargazer undergoes a refit, and for the foreseeable future. But after speaking with Guinan at the 602 Club at Starfleet Command after his mother passes, Picard chooses to go back on the Stargazer, since that's where he can make the most difference, giving up a chance with Janice, who had been his mother's health aide. But he can't just make a move on her. He's got to wait for 7 seasons until she's engaged to Kivas Fajo, and then run away in an RV. Now, wait a minute, I think I'm thinking about a different captain. Over the years, Picard gets to know Beverly as she dates Jack, and eventually she and Jack get married, have a child named Wesley, and Picard's father dies. On an away mission, Jack is killed protecting Picard, and then Picard loses the Stargazer to the Ferengi, but saves the crew with the Picard maneuver. Because of their former relationship, Louvois goes hard on Picard during the court-martial, and despite Picard not being formally charged, he's not going to be given another ship for a while, especially because Starfleet is restructuring and pulling many of the older ships out of service. Picard captains a desk for a little bit and has experiences that will eventually shape the crew of his next ship, the Enterprise D, including his first meetings with Deanna Troi, Geordi LaForge, Data, Worf, and Natasha Yar. The book goes into detail leading up to Picard taking command, but it glosses over major events of the next 10 years, and gives us a few insights into why Picard let Wesley join the bridge crew, the rediscovery of the Stargazer, and the installation of 10 Forward, which needs a bartender, and Picard knows exactly who to call. It also explains why Pulaski left the crew, because Picard was fed up with her contentious nature, which may have been caused by Picard's unresolved feelings about Dr. Crusher. We also get insight into Picard's mind meld with Sarek, finally seeing what Picard experienced. We hit the Battle of Wolf 359 and Picard's mind during assimilation, recognizing many of the ships that the Borg destroy that contain old friends, and the immediate aftermath, including his return to the family vineyards and the Picard family mud wrestling. And something we didn't get to see on screen, Robert showing Jean-Luc the basement portrait gallery, which now includes one of himself and of Jean-Luc. There's some insights into the inner light and Picard's experiences as Kamen, and we see Guinan's first meeting with Picard in San Francisco 1893, and we also get 2 heavy psychological moments for Picard, his experience with Golma Dredd and the Four Lights, and having to meet with Benjamin Sisko on Deep Space Nine. Picard loses his final father figure when Galen dies in the chase, and the book jumps straight to Kirk's death on Veridian 3. Would have liked some insight on the finale, but I guess Generations is fine. There's some talk about why Worf decided not to return as security chief permanently, and some unseen moments from First Contact, before it mercifully skips over Insurrection and goes straight into the end of Nemesis, whereas Picard explains what happened on Romulus with Shinzon and Janeway. Q shows up and reasserts the Data personality within B4 and restores Data to life. With everyone moving on, Picard decides to retire and marry Beverly, finally, and she agrees. Years later, the Hobus event happens, and Picard decides to try his hand at playing ambassador. Unfortunately, Spock vanishes and Romulus is lost, so Picard's ambassadorship is duly revoked. Despite that, Picard is content to return home to France and keep making wine, as the story ends and the now 90-year-old Picard finishes writing down his life story. So, the Picard book instantly had a major wrinkle that the Kirk book didn't have, and that's the fact that in Kirk's case, there were several aspects of his history, due to the original series having a weird production history with a literal decade passing between the show and the movies, and so many false starts that caused in-universe time skips, had a lot of room for interpretation, unseen events, plus the unseen time that passed between the second pilot and the first episode of TOS proper, plus the revelations given to us with the J.J. Abrams reboot movies that shows glimpses at Kirk's early life that the show never gave us. Picard's history is pretty well documented once he gets to the Enterprise D, with the movies continuing on straight on from there. So the major bits are pre-TNG and post-Nemesis, and while the pre-TNG era is pretty well stocked, we get nary a glimpse at his post-Nemesis life, apart from his marriage to Beverly and the Hobus stuff that we already know about because it was in Star Trek Countdown. And I know what you're all thinking. What if someone who read the book hasn't read Star Trek Countdown? It's new information to them. And my rebuttal is, do you really think someone who deliberately picks up the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard hasn't read Star Trek Countdown? Kirk had a lot of leeway, which made his book exciting since it was getting a glimpse at eras only covered in novels, and it fills in Kirk's character since There was a lot of pathos injected between the original series and the movies because of the nature of narratives in their respective mediums. Picard didn't really have that. His character was fairly well established throughout the Next Generation, so the book spends a lot of time pre-Enterprise D on the slow burn, and then basically rushes us through the Next Generation in a mad dash toward the end, and then it's over. And sure, it hits the fan favorites, but we don't even get a moment of Picard's inner monologue before he crashes the poker game in the finale, which I think would have been a far better capstone than Galen's death. Another issue is that because it skips the stuff we saw on the show, it feels woefully incomplete, given that it's written like an in-universe reference guide. Like, we just skip over a whole decade of Picard's life. Kirk gets a pass because I feel like Starfleet classified damn near every mission of Kirk's Enterprise, given that no one ever talks about them in-universe. In this book, we get no mentions of Vosh, despite most of the other love interest only having appeared once, and there are a bunch more episodes with Picard-centric plots that Goodman neglects, like Picard's kidnapping in Allegiance, or Captain Picard Day from the Pegasus. I would kill to find out that Picard secretly really liked one of the projects and, took it home with him. That being said, the book is a treat for Trek fans because it covers things and people that were only brief cameos or guest spots in the show proper, and it's really interesting to see how Goodman developed certain things that were only left implied. Plus, so much has developed since The Next Generation that there are references here and there that make being a fan of Star Trek Online really gratifying, like the reference to the Zenkethi and the Iconians. I admit, I'm not really a fan of retconning AF to be a nameless woman. For one thing, it's a boring reveal, and it feels very chauvinist in a way that Picard shouldn't be. Same with Spock's unnamed human bride, but I suppose that there's hope that we'll see that paid off in the Spock book, so... There's also a few references that sorta irk me, like tossing in the Planet Killer, which feels like meaningless fan service, since it's not like Picard ever alluded to facing one, and having Picard defeat it kinda undercuts Kirk barely scraping through it. And as much as I love Data, and believe me, I do, I squealed with delight when he showed up in the trailer for Star Trek Picard, and he's probably the character I identify most with after Rex Barclay. I disagree with Goodman's revival of Data, especially having it take place immediately following Nemesis. I hate Data's death, but it was a good death. He went out saving the crew, and Brent Spiner at that point wanted it. Same reason why I'm not mad about Han Solo's death. Harrison Ford wanted Han to die in The Empire Strikes Back. I know they have to establish how Captain Data could exist in Countdown, but I don't think that Data would want to completely have rewritten B4's neural net, which is something from the Star Trek Online lore that I really like. Data refused to overwrite B4 until B4 deleted himself to allow his brother to live again. Something similar happened in the TNG relaunch novels, where Dr. Sung, who was also alive, but we don't have time to get into that, transferred Data's engrams out of B4 and into his own body so that both can live simultaneously. Even though it makes sense for Q to do this, especially given Q and Data's interactions during Deja Q, I feel like even Q would have respect for Data's wishes. It also feels cheap and fanservice-y, like a lot of moments in the book are, but most of the other fan service is charming, like during Picard's time captaining a desk for Admiral Hansen, he gets to interact with Admiral Chekhov. This has the feel of Goodman wanted Data back and didn't have anywhere else to stick it in the book. While it's obviously non-canonical, it does feel like it was written by Jean-Luc Picard himself. Goodman has a talent of really being able to inhabit the characters he writes these for, which is probably why Una McCormack is doing Janeways. You'd probably want a woman to inhabit a female character to tell her story, with unique insights that us men don't have. Building on that inhabitation, there are a lot of good moments, like Goodman justifying Picard's father being an asshole about Starfleet and the technology, because he had been rejected from the Academy, and unlike his son who gave it another go, retreated back to the safety of the Vineyard. My biggest problem, I think, is that it's a little strange that Picard expresses his feelings for Beverly to himself, and recognizes that he likes her, right after telling Wesley about Jack's death. Like, there's a fine line to tread when it comes to the creep factor, and there's always the risk in Next Generation stuff of implying that Picard might have deliberately sent Jack to his death because he wanted Beverly for himself, subconsciously, of course. And this manages to buck that by simply having Jack take over the away mission, because as first officer, his responsibility is to ensure the captain's safety, so it was Jack's own actions that led to it, and the captain can't countermand the first officer if he's right. I just felt that maybe there could be a line that was like, "It wasn't until weeks later that I realized I had feelings for Beverly, but I knew it was too late." Just to distance it from seeing his best friend's corpse with his widow. One final critique, and it's a very tiny one, but I have to bring it up. It's established that Picard captains a desk for a while before retaking the Stargazer, and Guinan inspires him to retake the center seat, which totally undercuts Kirk's message in Generations of,
"Don't let them promote you. Don't let them transfer you. Don't let them do anything that takes you off the bridge of that ship, because while you're there, you can make a difference."
because it was a lesson that Picard had already learned ages ago through Guinan. Overall, I think I'd say that I enjoyed the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard. There's a few hiccups here and there, but ultimately, it's not as grossly fan-servicey as Before Dishonor was, where the planet killer and Spock were major parts of that book's narrative. In here, all fan service, even the bits that feel gratuitous, especially the mention of the North Star colony, are only small parts of a larger story. And for that, I can't help but recommend it. It's non-canon and probably about to be totally usurped by Star Trek Picard, but it's a wholly enjoyable read. Plus, the Photoshop job was really good on the photo inserts that depict photos from Picard's life. Goodman's got a great handle on the Star Trek universe and did a great job with this one, and I'm really looking forward to both his Spock autobiography and McCormack's Janeway one. Though, I'm not sure if I want Janeway's inner monologue if it's not written by S.F. Debris. In addition, the book's exploration of Picard's life has made me even more excited for next week's Picard premiere, which looks like it's gonna be awesome. Next video, Patreon-sponsored review time again over on How to Fix It, as I take a look at a couple of episodes of the British medical drama Casualty. See you next time. Which needs a bartender? You probably can't hear the siren, but I can.